tower that breathed. Cal Monroe, Flathead National Forest, Montana, 1983. The forest is not merely a place. It's a presence, a vast, breathing entity that sprawls across the earth like a living shroud. In the Flathead National Forest of Montana, where ancient pines thrust upward like the ribs of some forgotten god, their needles whispering secrets to a sky perpetually bruised with gray, I sought refuge. My name is Cal Monroe, and in the summer of 1983, I was a fire lookout, stationed in a wooden tower 20 miles from Red Ridge. A town so small it felt like a ghost clinging to the edge of memory, its handful of clapboard buildings and dirt streets barely etched into the map. The tower itself was a relic, a skeletal thing of weathered boards rising 80 feet above the forest floor. Its stairs a splintered spine that creaked and swayed with every step I took. Each morning, I'd climb them, boots sinking into the soft rot, the wood groaning as if protesting my intrusion, and from the top, I'd gaze out over an unbroken sea of green. An expanse so endless it swallowed the horizon. A wilderness so complete it seemed to erase the world I'd left behind. That was what I wanted. After Margie. After the divorce papers were signed and our marriage crumbled into ash amid screams and silences. I needed a solitude so absolute it could drown the echoes of her voice still ringing in my skull. The tower was my sanctuary, or so I believed. Supplies arrived every 2 weeks, hauled up a dirt road so rutted it was more a suggestion than a path. Dropped off by a ranger named Tom who'd grunt a greeting through a beard flecked with tobacco stains and vanish back into the trees. I filled my days with routine, scanning the horizon for smoke through binoculars that fogged with my breath, reading paperbacks until the pages curled and yellowed in the damp air, listening to the tower's bones settle, a low, rhythmic creaking that became a companion in the quiet. The fire radio sat on a rickety table, its crackle a faint lifeline to the outside, though I rarely used it. I'd brought a rifle, a .30-06 with a scarred stock, more for comfort than necessity, and it leaned against the wall beside my cot, gathering dust. The forest stretched out below, a tapestry of pine and shadow, and in its vastness, I found a rhythm I could lean into, a balm for a soul still raw from the fights that had torn Margie and me apart. She'd called me cold, said I'd shut her out long before the end, and maybe she was right. Up here, I could be cold without consequence, alone without judgment. For a while it worked, until the third week of July, when the forest turned its gaze upon me, and the silence I'd craved became a lie. It began at night, subtle at first, sounds threading through the dark like threads in a tapestry I couldn't see. Not the familiar chorus of the wild. Coyotes yipping in the distance, owls hooting from unseen perches, but something stranger, something that didn't belong. Metal clinking, faint and sharp, like chains dragged across stone in a breeze that didn't stir the pines. Sometimes it was branches snapping, heavy and deliberate. Not the quick crack of a deer's hoof, but the slow, measured weight of something pacing just beyond the reach of my lantern's feeble glow. I'd sit up on my cot, the springs squeaking beneath me, and strain to hear, the sound fading into the night's thick hush. I told myself it was the wind, that isolation was bending my mind. Solitude does that, twists perception until shadows dance where they shouldn't. But the noises persisted, growing bolder with each passing night. A prickling crept up my neck, a sensation I hadn't felt since childhood. When the dark held shapes I couldn't name and my mother's voice couldn't banish them. I'd sweep the flashlight beam across the clearing below, its circle of light trembling with my pulse. But the forest stared back, unyielding, its depths a wall of black. One evening, the restlessness became unbearable. I'd spent the day pacing the tower's cramped interior. 12 feet by 12, walls lined with peeling maps and a single shelf of books. Margie's absence gnawing at me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I needed air, needed to feel the ground beneath my boots, so I climbed down, the stairs swaying under my weight, and walked into the pines. It was that liminal hour when the sky turned purple, the sun bleeding out behind the ridges, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was cool, carrying the sharp scent of resin, and the ground was a soft carpet of needles that muffled my steps. I wandered deeper than I'd intended, chasing a peace I hadn't felt since she'd packed her bags and left me staring at an empty apartment. 50 yards out, I stopped, the hairs on my arms rising. There, between the trees, stood a figure. Motionless, too far to discern, too close to dismiss. Its silhouette was wrong. Too tall, too still, its edges blurring into the dusk like ink spilled on wet paper. No face, just a void where one should be. My breath caught, a cold fist tightening in my chest, and I waited, rooted to the spot, for it to move, to retreat or approach. Didn't. It just stood there, staring, its presence a weight I could feel on my skin. Panic clawed at me, but I was too far from the tower to bolt without betraying that I'd seen it. So I walked on, slow and deliberate, as if blind to its gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs, my mouth dry as dust. The figure remained, a sentinel in the twilight, until I slipped from its sight behind a cluster of pines. When I reached the tower, I scrambled up the stairs, the wood splintering under my boots, and slammed the hatch shut, twisting the lock with shaking hands. I grabbed the radio, its cold metal grounding me, and keyed the mic. "Anyone reported near my sector?" I asked, forcing my voice steady despite the tremor in my fingers. "No," Tom's voice crackled back, curt and final. "It's just you out there." I nodded to the empty room, as if he could see me, and set the radio down. For the next few nights, I stayed inside, rifle within reach, binoculars pressed to my eyes, scanning the tree line for any sign of it. The forest was still, the clinking absent, and I began to wonder if I'd imagined it, until a week later, when the wilderness showed me its teeth. Restlessness drove me out again, this time toward a narrow creek that sliced through the forest like a silver vein, its banks lined with moss-slick stones. The air was cool for July, the water glinting in the last light, and for a moment, I felt the tension ease, the knot in my gut loosening as I breathed in the damp earth. I crossed to the far bank, my boots sinking into the soft mud, and there it was, stabbed into a pine trunk, a hunting knife, its rusted blade coated in dried blood, dark and crusted like tar against the steel. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I hadn't seen a soul in weeks. Who had been here, and whose blood was that? The blade was old, its handle worn smooth, and the blood was fresh enough to gleam faintly in the dusk. I didn't touch it. Instinct screamed to leave it be, and I turned back, my heart hammering as I retraced my steps to the tower. The hatch locked behind me. I grabbed the binoculars, their lenses fogging with my breath, and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but the silence was too deep, too heavy, a darkness I couldn't trust. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat in my chair, rifle across my lap, the barrel cold against my thigh, listening as the clinking returned. Louder, closer, metal striking metal in a rhythm that set my teeth on edge. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I swept the beam across the clearing below, and there it was, the figure standing just outside the tower, gazing up at me with that faceless void. Dread coiled in my gut, tight and unyielding, a knot I couldn't unravel. It was the same shape, closer now, its outline sharper but no less wrong. Too tall, too still, its presence a violation of the natural order. Slowly, it moved toward the base, each step deliberate, and I scrambled for the rifle, hands slick with sweat as I fumbled around into the chamber. The clinking grew deafening, unnatural, a sound that burrowed into my skull, and I aimed out the window, tracking its path. But before I could steady the barrel, it vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of its noise. I didn't radio for help. Who'd believe me? A man alone too long, conjuring phantoms from his fractured mind. Margie's voice mocked me from memory. "You're losing it, Cal." But I wasn't imagining this. Morning brought proof. Footprints in the soft earth below, large and human, yet strange. One leg dragging behind in a lopsided gait, the toes splayed unnaturally wide. They stretched half a mile into a thicket of pines, the trail weaving through underbrush thick with thorns, before vanishing into the gloom. I followed them, rifle slung over my shoulder, the forest pressing in around me. Branches clawing at my jacket, the air thick with the scent of sap and decay. The tracks ended abruptly, as if whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. But they were enough. Enough to know I wasn't alone, that something shared this wilderness with me, something that watched from the shadows. The days blurred into paranoia, every rustle a threat, every shadow a figure waiting to emerge. I stopped leaving the tower, kept the rifle within reach, scanned the forest hourly through binoculars that left my eyes burning from sleepless nights. The clinking returned sporadically, always at night, always closer, and I'd sit with the flashlight trained on the hatch, waiting for it to climb the stairs. It didn't until the storm. The summer had been dry, the air crackling with tension, and when the rain came, it was a deluge. Lightning splitting the sky like a jagged wound, thunder shaking the tower's frame, sheets of water pounding the wood until it wept. I watched from the window, a strange relief in the chaos, the noise drowning out the clinking, until it pierced through, insistent and close, metal striking the tower's side with a force that rattled the glass. Rifle in hand, I threw open the balcony door, the wind lashing my face with icy rain, and aimed into the downpour. Lightning flared, illuminating the clearing, and there it stood at the base, staring up, unmoving, unyielding, a silhouette against the storm's fury. "Who are you?" I shouted, voice torn away by the gale. It didn't answer, just waited, its presence a challenge. I fired a warning shot skyward, the crack swallowed by thunder, but it didn't flinch. Heart pounding, I reloaded, the cartridge slick in my fingers, and aimed true. Lightning flashed again, and I pulled the trigger. The figure crumpled, a dark heap against the wet earth, and I waited, breathless, staring down, unsure what I'd done. It didn't move. All night, I watched, rifle raised, the storm's roar fading into a dripping hush, until dawn broke through the remnants of cloud. Climbing down, I approached cautiously, the air thick with rain and a faint rot that turned my stomach. It was a man, an old man, pale as bone, his skin stretched tight over a gaunt frame, clothes tattered as if he'd lived out here for decades. In his hands, a rusted chain, broken and coiled like a snake, a padlock dangling from one end, its surface pitted with age. His eyes, open and lifeless, stared skyward, and I felt the weight of what I'd killed, or thought I had. The Rangers came later, their truck rumbling up the road, and took the body, their faces grim but incurious. "Probably a drifter," Tom said, spitting into the mud. "Lost his way, went mad out here. They didn't ask much, didn't linger, and I stayed another week." The tower's creaks louder now, as if mourning. But I knew better. That chain, those footprints, those eyes, they weren't wholly human. Something else had watched me, something the forest cradled in its depths. The final days in the tower were a descent into a quiet I couldn't trust. I'd sit by the window, rifle across my knees, watching the tree line as the sun sank, painting the pines in blood-red light. The clinking didn't return, but the silence was worse. A heavy, expectant hush that pressed against the walls, as if the forest held its breath, waiting for me to step into its jaws. I dream of Margie, her face twisted with accusation. "You brought this on yourself, Cal," and wake to the tower's groans, unsure if they were wood or something else. When the Rangers reassigned me, I packed in silence. The chain's image burned into my mind, its rusted links a riddle I'd never solve. I left the tower standing, a lone sentinel against the green, and drove away, the road's ruts jarring my bones. But as Red Ridge faded in the rearview, I heard it, one last clink, faint and sharp, from the trees. I didn't look back. The forest kept its secret, and I kept mine, a man marked by what he'd seen, fleeing a wilderness that never forgets. The Shadow of Red Ridge. Anonymous, Rockies, 1982. The Rockies rise like a fortress of stone and pine, their ridges slicing the sky with jagged, unyielding teeth, their shadows pooling in valleys where the sun dares not linger. In 1982, fresh from the jungles of Vietnam, where the air was thick with sweat and gunfire, and death wore the faces of men I'd once called brothers, I took a fire lookout post there, seeking a peace I wasn't sure existed. The tower perched on a ridge overlooking miles of dense forest, a skeletal frame of wood and rust that trembled in the wind, its windows rattling like loose teeth. Red Ridge, 40 miles south, was a sleepy town. A bar with a flickering neon sign, a gas station where the pump handles were slick with grease, and whispers of hunters who'd vanished into the wild. I'd seen enough chaos, enough blood, to crave solitude, to believe I could outrun the screams that still woke me at night. I was wrong. The forest was a labyrinth of pine and shadow, its floor a carpet of needles that swallowed sound, its canopy a ceiling that filtered the sun into thin, wavering beams. I'd climb the tower's rickety stairs each dawn, the wood groaning beneath my boots, and scan the horizon with binoculars that smelled of mildew, watching for the telltale haze of smoke. Supplies came monthly, hauled by a ranger who'd nod and leave me to my silence. I liked it that way. No chatter, no questions, just the wind's low moan and the creak of the tower settling into its bones. Vietnam had left me hollow. A man who'd fired rifles until his hands shook and seen bodies torn apart by shrapnel. And I thought the quiet would fill that void. For a while it did. But that year, something shifted in Red Ridge. Something dark. Something that seeped into the forest like ink into water. It started with the disappearances. Hunters, mostly, hard men with rifles and flasks, who knew the woods as well as I knew the weight of a gun. They'd go out and not come back. Search parties returned with scraps. An old rifle half buried in mud, a bloody jacket snagged on thorns, but never bodies. The locals muttered about grizzlies, wolves, the usual culprits, but there was an undercurrent of fear, a whisper that grew louder with each missing soul. At the bar, a drunk named Daryl, his face weathered by whiskey and wind, swore he'd seen it one night near the old logging roads. A thing tall and thin, moving between the trees, not human, not animal, with eyes like burning coals. The room laughed, but he pulled a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light, and swore on his life it was real. They dragged him out, screaming, and 2 weeks later he was gone. Another name lost to the wild. I didn't think much of it at first. People vanish in the woods. Drunkards, fools, men too stubborn to admit they're lost. But one evening, as the sun bled red behind the peaks, the radio crackled to life. "Hiker missing near the ridge," the voice said, clipped and tired. "Keep an eye out for smoke or movement. Search parties are coming, but it'll be dark soon." I agreed, settling in with my binoculars, the lenses fogging with my breath. The forest fell silent, too silent if that makes sense. No crickets chirped, no wind rustled the pines. It was a stillness so heavy it pressed against my chest. I sat at my desk, a scarred slab of wood littered with coffee rings, and scanned the tree line, the dusk turning the world to shades of gray. Midnight crept in and I figured I'd sleep until I heard it. Footsteps, not the crunch of boots on gravel or the scamper of an animal, but something dragging, heavy and uneven, climbing the ridge toward the tower. My heart kicked against my ribs, a rhythm I hadn't felt since the war. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam trembling as I stepped onto the deck, the cold biting my skin through my jacket. The moon hung low, barely lighting the treetops, and I listened, straining to pinpoint the sound. It grew closer, deliberate, like something wounded yet relentless. I aimed the light into the woods, sweeping the ground below, and there it was, a figure at the edge of the tree line, too far to make out clearly but too wrong to be human. It stood on two legs, hunched, its arms long and dragging near the earth, swaying as it moved, almost injured, but not quite. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze, a weight that turned my stomach to ice. Panic surged, and I bolted inside, locking the door with hands that wouldn't steady, my mind racing. A bear, I told myself. A sick one, staggering through the dark. But I knew better. The footsteps stopped, silence pressing against the tower's walls like a living thing. I grabbed my rifle from under the cot, its barrel cold against my palms, and sat on the floor, back to the wall, waiting. An hour passed, maybe two, the wind rattling the windows, and I thought it had gone, until the knocking began. Soft at first, almost polite, tapping against the wood below. I froze, breath shallow, staring at the door. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, claws scraping the boards in slow, methodical strokes. Whatever it was, it knew I was inside, and it was in no rush. It had all night. The tower shook, a sudden crash against its side, and my ears rang with the noise. I backed away, heart racing, as it circled below, pacing, tapping, scraping, a predator toying with prey. I aimed the rifle at the door, finger on the trigger, ready for it to break through, but it never did. Dawn came, the first light spilling through the windows, and the sounds faded, leaving only the wind. I stepped outside, rifle slung over my shoulder, expecting tracks, claw marks, something. But the ground was bare, the forest empty, as if it had never been there. I didn't tell anyone, not then. They'd think me mad, like Daryl, a man broken by solitude. But I knew what I'd seen. The search parties never found the hiker. Just his pack, a mile off, torn to shreds, empty of anything human. I stayed another month, the silence growing thicker, the feeling of being watched never leaving. Each night, I'd sit with the rifle, listening for the dragging steps, the knocking, but it didn't return. Not while I was there. The final weeks were a slow unraveling. I'd wake to the tower's creaks, sharper now, as if the wood itself whispered warnings. The forest loomed larger, its shadows stretching toward me, and I'd catch glimpses, flickers at the tree line, too quick to pin down. My dreams were haunted by Vietnam, the jungle's heat replaced by pine and frost, and that figure stood among the trees, its coal eyes burning. I checked the radio daily, its static a lifeline I clung to, but no one spoke of the missing, as if they'd been erased. When I quit, I packed in silence, the rifle heavier in my hands, and descended the stairs one last time, their groans a farewell. The drive out was a blur, red ridge fading behind me, but as I reached the highway, I heard it. A faint scrape, claw on wood, from the forest's edge. I floored the gas, heart pounding, and didn't stop until the mountains were a smudge on the horizon. The tower stands still, a lone witness to the shadow, and I wonder if it waits, patient as stone, for the next soul to climb its steps. The Stillwater Stalker. Anonymous, Stillwater Tower, Montana. Stillwater Tower was my refuge, a wooden perch 50 miles deep in Montana's wilderness, where the trees stretched endlessly and the nearest soul was a day's hike away. I'd taken the job after a breakup that left me shattered. Her name was Lisa, and she'd walked out with half my heart and all my certainty, leaving me a man unmoored, drowning in whiskey and regret. The tower offered isolation, a chance to stitch myself back together amid the quiet, and I leapt at it. The dirt road leading in was a winding scar through the forest, fading into nothing, and the tower itself was a weathered box atop stilts, its walls lined with maps and its windows streaked with grime. I'd been there 3 weeks, settling into a rhythm. Coffee at dawn, scans for smoke, nights with a lantern and a book. When the wilderness turned strange, its silence twisting into something alive. I've always been logical, a man who trusts what he can see, touch, reason out. Forests are noisy places. Deer rustling through underbrush, coyotes howling under the moon, and I'd grown used to their chorus. But one night, the sounds changed. Not animals, not wind, but something closer, almost human yet not, circling the tower at a distance. It was subtle, a faint shuffle, a twig snapping with intent, and I brushed it off, blaming my mind, the dark, the solitude. Lisa's voice echoed in my head. You're too in your head, always imagining things. But the next night, it returned, louder, nearer, a shadow flickering at the clearing's edge, gone before I could focus the binoculars. I sat up straight, coffee forgotten, peering into the black, but the forest swallowed it whole. Probably a bear, I told myself, though the excuse rang hollow. Morning brought no tracks, no broken branches, just the stillness of the pines. A few days later, the radio died, old, temperamental, its static fading to silence. I fiddled with it, but no luck. No matter, I had days before my next check-in, and the ranger station was a drive away if I needed it. That night, the footsteps came again, slow and deliberate. Not an animal scamper, but a human stride, measured, trying not to be heard. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark, and stepped onto the deck, the cold night air rushing in. "Hello," I called, voice steady despite the thud in my chest. No answer. "If someone's out there, speak up." Nothing. Just a silence so thick it pressed down, raising the hairs on my neck. I felt exposed, a target in the lantern's glow. So I retreated, locked the door, and kept the rifle close, its weight a cold comfort. Dawn revealed the first sign I wasn't mad, footprints in the soft dirt below. Bare, not boots, oversized for any man I'd known, and deep, as if whatever made them was heavy beyond reason. I'm a size 12, and these dwarfed my own, the toes splayed wide, unnatural. No one should be out here barefoot in the middle of nowhere. It didn't make sense. That night, I killed the lights, sat in the dark with the rifle across my lap, every creak of the tower a jolt to my nerves. At 2 a.m., the footsteps returned, circling, slow and methodical, a predator sizing me up. Then the knocking, soft, deliberate, on the tower's base, a rhythm that taunted me. I stood, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other, and threw open the door, shining the beam down. Nothing. The knocking stopped, but I felt eyes on me, a gaze I couldn't shake. "What do you want?" I shouted, voice cracking. "Show yourself." The forest swallowed my words, leaving only my ragged breathing. Morning brought more prints, closer now, right beneath my window, as if it had stood there, unseen, watching me sleep. I packed a bag, food, water, a map, and decided to hike to the ranger station. I couldn't stay, couldn't wait to find out what stalked me. 10 miles out, the sun dipped low, and I camped by a stream, the fire's crackle my only companion. The feeling returned, being watched, the air thick with it, and then the footsteps, slow, deliberate, closer. I grabbed the rifle, swept the flashlight around, but the trees hid whatever came. The steps stopped, silence pressing in, and then a voice. A man's, low and raspy, from the dark. "You shouldn't have left the tower." My blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I called, voice shaking. No answer, just the fire's snap and the wind's whisper. I didn't sleep, sat with the rifle aimed into the night, waiting. At dawn, I hiked on, checking behind me, sure it followed. The ranger station was empty. No rangers, no cars, just more barefoot prints leading into the woods. Panic took me. I grabbed the keys to an old truck and drove, 30 miles to the nearest town, never stopping. I never went back, never learned what hunted me. But at night, alone, I hear those steps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. The escape didn't end it. In that town, Cutbank, a speck of dust and brick. I found a room above a bar, its walls thin with the hum of voices below. I'd sit by the window, curtains drawn, staring at the streetlights flicker, the rifle beside me like a talisman. The first night, I slept fitfully, dreaming of Lisa, her face soft, then twisting into something eyeless, her voice rasping that warning. "You shouldn't have left." I woke to a faint tapping, not on the window but inside my skull, a rhythm I couldn't shake. Days passed, and I'd walk Cutbank streets, avoiding eyes, the forest's pull tugging at me like a tide. I'd see footprints in the dust, bare, oversized, fleeting before I could prove them real, and hear that voice at dusk, a whisper on the wind. "You can't leave it behind." I stayed a month, each night a vigil, the tapping growing louder, the steps echoing in the alley below. The bar's patrons spoke of missing dogs, a hunter gone silent, and I'd listen, mute, knowing what they didn't. One evening, as the sun bled out, I saw it. A shadow at the town's edge, swaying between the last houses, its arms too long, its gaze a weight I felt through the glass. I packed that night, drove east, the truck's engine a roar against the silence, but the rear view showed nothing, just the road and the dark. Years later, in a city of concrete and noise, I still hear it. Footsteps in the quiet, a knock at the edge of sleep, and I wonder if the tower still stands, if it waits for me to return, to finish what began in Stillwater's depths. The forest owns me still, and I run, knowing it follows, patient as death.